Bonsoir tout le monde. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our budget consultation today. We have with us Councillor Mike Cohen, Councillor Sidney Ben-Isri, our Treasurer Angela Marino, Councillor Stephen Erdely, Councillor Lior Azarad. We also have online the other councillors, some even out of town, but they're all here either in this room or online with those of you who are online participating in this meeting. We're very lucky this year. We're always lucky, but this is a great year in terms of the hard work from our Treasurer, Director of Finance, Angela Marino, and also a big thank you to our Councillor responsible for Finance, Stephen Erdely, for an excellent job done on the budget. And we're 2 weeks early this year. I think we're probably the earliest of all the cities in presenting our budget. And it's a good budget. It's a good budget. It's a balanced budget, as always, with a reasonable tax increase. And it wasn't easy, but a lot of work was done. A lot of time was spent by the audit committee and by our treasurer and Councillor Erdely, where we have come to a position which I think the residents will be happy. We're able to do a lot, both in our capital budget and our operating budget, to keep the city running smoothly and offer all the services that our residents enjoy, and also spend money on capital projects that are important to the citizens of Côte Saint-Luc, so that our streets and our pipes and everything else is well maintained. So very pleased with this budget, and I hope you'll get a full presentation of all the details, and we're looking forward to a good year, and hopefully many more in the future, but this is a good one. So we're doing the draft operating and the capital. Draft operating and capital.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'll start first just by sharing. So this year we're presenting the budget about 2 weeks early. So today's December 2nd. We're going to be adopting the budget in 2 weeks. So we'll be adopting the budget on December 16th and the tax rates on December 18th. Normally we adopt the budget and present it the same evening. The difference this year, we're trying to do it earlier, because what happens in a normal year is we present the budget, we take questions, and then adopt the budget. And even if a resident has an amazing question or amazing thought, it's impossible to change it because it's too late. So the goal is to give residents one more chance. For next year, I'll just mention our goal is to adopt it even earlier, to do it about 4 weeks early. Although we know in next year, 2025 is an election year, and what we've seen in terms of Montreal, I'll just share previous years or previous election years, is Montreal's a bit late to give us the agglomeration quote-part, which is the amount of money we have to pay the central city, which accounts for about 40% of our budget. So normally we know a bit earlier. In this case, we found out in the last few weeks, and it was confirmed. But often in an election year, especially when there's we know in Montreal there'll be a new mayor. We don't know which party he or she will be from, but the point is, those years, usually we only find out end of December or even January, so it pushes our budget a bit later. But again, the hope is to try to do it as early as possible to give residents a chance to give their feedback before it's finalized. And just to also reiterate the mayor's point, I want to take a moment to thank our treasurer, Angela Marino, and director of finance, and thank the members of the audit committee, some of whom are here. Lior Azarad, who's been a great member, Dita Burku, who's online, and Mitch Kajavsky as well. Councillor Kajavsky is also online. So I'm just looking at the time. I'll present the budget. It'll take about 45 minutes. I'm not going to go through every line because, but I will mention copies are available to those in the room. So you have copies in the back of the room. It is also available on our Côte Saint-Luc website. So residents can go through it in more detail. And if you have questions, feel free to email myself or email the treasurer. You can also use the email, I think it's finance@cotesaintluc.org. And it's on the last slide. So you can use that email as well. And I'm just making sure it's all good. So again, today, to summarize, we'll be presenting the 2025 draft operating budget and the 2025 to 2029 draft capital investment plan. And it's a 5-year plan. I'll just mention also one more thing before I get into the details. I'll just say that this was an easier budget. There's always a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes. The previous 2 years, we were dealing with significant increases in terms of the agglomeration code par. We are dealing with increases in inflation, which seems to have settled, and we are dealing with a reduction in home sales, which led to less welcome tax or transfer duties, which also caused significant stress in terms of the city. So I don't want to say those are gone, but I would say those are less of an issue for the 2025 budget year. And obviously, we can't predict the future. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here. We'd all be somewhere else. But hopefully, that trend will continue into 2026. So I'll keep going. In terms of, just make sure, second. Just making sure things are moving on the technical side. So a quick overview of the agenda. So I'll go through the budget process, the principles, an overview of the 2025 budget, and I'll explain some of the differences in terms of local versus the code par or the agglomeration, talk about revenues, expenses, and then look at the tax rates, of course, the capital budget, and I'll just mention briefly now, and I'll be saying it a few times. So the capital budget, we adopt a 5-year plan. However, really the items for next year are pretty much set in stone, and the following year, are sometimes fluctuating year to year. And we'll talk about our priorities, and we'll have a question period at the end. So those that are here, will have a chance to ask some questions when it's done. So next, I'll go into just the process itself. So I won't go through every point, but we started in May, June, looking at the current year. Determining the principles and priorities for the new year, looking at salaries and some new hires or possibly positions that are no longer necessary. And then looking from November to early December, looking at different drafts to get to where we are today, which is in the red box. So this is the presentation of the budget, and the final step again will be the approval of the budget, which will be in 2 weeks from today. So in terms of the guiding principles, so the main one is we want a balanced budget. We want a balance between the revenues and expenses. We want to look at minimizing the burden on taxpayers. So most of the last 10 years, and there'll be a slide on this in a few minutes, most of the last 10 years, we've kept the tax increase in line with inflation. The last 2 years were more problematic for reasons mentioned. But we try to do that. We try to leverage and maximize the grants that are available from the federal and provincial government. And we also want to make sure that if we do start a new service or new program, it's sustainable, because we don't want to, unnecessarily unduly harm the city in terms of the financial side. And I would say we also want to make sure we're funding our core business. So what are the key services that residents need? And, we talked about amongst ourselves, what makes Côte Saint-Luc Côte Saint-Luc? What makes Côte Saint-Luc the special city it is that we've all chosen to live in. So again, these are some of the priorities and principles. In terms of some external factors, so again, the biggest one is the agglomeration code par. And I'll talk a bit more in a moment about the valuation for homes, and how we're in the last year of a roll. But basically, the biggest factor is we don't fully know what the agglomeration code par is going to be until a few weeks before we adopt our budget. So this year, it's an increase of approximately 1.2 million, so representing a 3.2% increase. Climate change, we know, is an issue. In terms of the public tenders, sometimes we get great rates in terms of roads and sidewalk construction, sometimes not as much. Our water infrastructure is aging, although we've invested quite a bit. We've relined about 25% of the pipes in the city. Inflation seems to be settling, but we never know, because it could shift. The interest rates, how they affect our long-term debt. The real estate market conditions, as mentioned, in previous meetings, this year was a good year, but we realize, from previous years that we can't necessarily predict the future. So we have to be, I guess, moderate in terms of our expectations, and managing the lifestyle of our residents, and in terms of technology and trends, and of course, dealing with the post-COVID world. So these are some of the external factors. En termes de services, il y a, comme je disais tout à l'heure, il y a des services locaux et des services de Côte-Part aux services d'agglomération. En termes de services locaux, il y a par exemple les travaux publics, il y a gestion de déchets, la protection civile, la sécurité, les SMU, la bibliothèque, loisirs, notre centre communautaire aquatique. En termes des services d'agglomération, il y a la police, le service d'incendie, les cours municipales, transport public, le STM, le centre d'urgence 911, logement social et le service du CMM. Alors, ceux-là sont les services locaux contre les services de Côte-Part. So again, in terms of the budget overall, we want to balance the budget so that the money coming in matches with the money going out. And, I was just at a meeting in Montreal where, and we'll talk a bit about the agglomeration deficit in a few slides, where, consistently the agglomeration keeps running deficits. This is my 19th year as a councillor, my 11th in charge of the finance dossier, and we have yet to produce a deficit. There was 1 or 2 years we came close, but we haven't had a deficit budget in 19 years, so I'm happy about that. In terms of the overview, so the average increase in municipal taxes for an average residential house, and this includes, average residential home, I should say, so this includes houses, condos, townhouses, where there was a 38.9% increase in terms of their valuation. So the average tax increase is 2.49%. So that is keeping in line with the prediction for inflation, just a touch above. In terms of the revenue side, some of the key factors, so you have the increase in taxation revenue, transfer duties, which again, we're hoping that the trend will continue in terms of more home sales and sales of apartments and so on. We have an increase in government grants, and I'll talk a bit about that later on, overall representing an increase in revenue of about 3.7 million or 4.2%. And of course, on the expense side, it'll be a matching number. But so we have an increase on the local expense side of 2.5 million, part of which is offset by the revenue. And part of it is, I would say, based on salaries and whatnot and cost of inflation. And then in terms of the agglomeration, as mentioned, it's approximately an increase of $1.2 million. So those are some of the key elements. So as I talked about earlier, the tax rate, so for 2025, the increase is about 2.5 or 2.49%, in line with the rate of inflation at 2.2. The previous 2 years, like I said, we were at 5.95, which was higher than we had hoped. As mentioned, those were in 2023 linked mostly to an increase in the agglomeration Côte-Part of 15.5%. The following year, the agglomeration increase was 5.5%, but we were also dealing with a decrease in the sales of homes, or at least based on the original budget and based on the numbers we saw in 2023, which ended up balancing out in the end. But basically, if you compare going back the last 10 years or so, most years we were either at the rate of inflation below or very close to, with the exception of 23 and 24. En termes de cette année, l'année qui vient, 2025, alors c'est la 3e année du rôle d'évaluation actuel. Alors, on va avoir bientôt, en 2025, le nouveau rôle d'évaluation, mais pour le moment, c'est la dernière année. Et ce qu'on a vu, c'est l'augmentation pour Côte-Saint-Luc, c'était plus haut que l'augmentation moyenne pour l'île de Montréal. Et c'est pour cette raison qu'on a vu une augmentation en termes de taxes, en termes de répartition de l'agglomération, le Côte-Part, d'environ 2 millions de dollars pour la ville de Côte-Saint-Luc. Alors, c'est un problème qu'on ne sait pas encore pour l'année prochaine, ce qui va venir, mais on espère que l'augmentation sera peut-être au même niveau ou j'espère que ce sera un peu plus bas. So again, this is looking at the latest valuation roll. So Côte-Saint-Luc properties increase, you could see with the 2 arrows. So the green, the first one is, or the one on the right, is for the Côte-Saint-Luc properties, increase at 37.8. For the island of Montreal was 32.4. So the issue is, again, when we are higher than the average, that's when we see a greater increase in taxes, greater increase in quote-par. We will know, I would say usually it's September of 2025 or so, we'll get the new valuation roll that will technically start on January 1st of 2026. We can only hope, but we'll have more information to share in the fall when we have that news. In terms of, again, the impact of the current valuation roll, so like I said, this is the third year. The average home, which includes houses, condos, and townhouses, went up about 38.9%. It was slightly higher, as has been the trend the last years for the single-family homes, slightly lower at 35.8 for the condos and townhouses, duplexes as well, a bit lower, and apartment 6+ were an increase of 36%. What we also saw was the non-residential properties only went up about 30%. And what that means, so the non-residential properties, I should clarify, includes, let's say, the 3 malls, it includes some towers and other non-residential buildings. What that meant was the shift in terms of taxes, and we'll see this again in a later slide, was slightly more tax dollars shifted towards residential homes and apartment buildings and a bit less shifted towards the non-residential property. So this is something that is a bit of a concern for years to come, but again, we'll know more in September of 2025. In terms of the average home, so just to give some rough numbers, the average home went from 520, the average home went from 545,000 to 757,000, and then the average single-family house, which is either a detached or semi-detached home, increased to $985,000. So these are numbers again from the 3-year roll that comes to an end in 2025. In terms of the average residential home, again, so the increase, as I said, was 2.49%. So for an average home, the total tax, including the municipal taxes, the special tax for water reserve and roads reserve, is going to be $6,422, representing an increase of $156 or 2.49%. Et si on regarde une maison unifamiliale, l'augmentation sera un peu plus élevée, à 3,12%, et ça représente une augmentation d'à peu près $253 pour la maison. So in terms of the total, so looking at total revenues versus total expenses, so the total revenues for 2025 is $92,710,000, again representing a 4.2% increase. The total expenses also matching at $92 million, and you see the breakdown in terms of the local at about $54.6 million, and the agglomeration plus the water expenses making up the remainder for the total again of $92.7 million. So now I'll go into more detail on the revenues. So in terms of revenues from taxes, so the majority of the funds for Côte Saint-Luc and for most of the demerged cities, and I would say for the island of Montreal as well, the majority is from tax revenue. So that's $77.7 million, and this includes both local and agglomeration. You have some local improvement taxes, which at this point is really just some of the properties in the former Cavendish Mall site, or the southern part of the Cavendish Mall site. You have some revenue from swimming pools, compensation for city services, and compensation lieu taxes. And so, yeah, compensation lieu taxes, just to explain, so this is the tax dollars we received from the federal and provincial government to cover the post office, schools, hospitals that are located within the territory of Côte Saint-Luc. So here you have kind of the breakdown in a bit more detail. So in terms of the total taxes, again, $77.7 million minus the agglomeration portion. So you have the taxes that go towards the city services or local services. You have some other, like I said, the local improvement taxes, compensation lieu, and then you have other fees, transfer duties, and government grants. And the transfer duties, so just to mention, we've increased it from 2.575 to about $3 million, which we think is an accurate number. We're hoping that the trend will continue, but that's basically the estimate for the upcoming year, for 2025. En termes de revenus de taxes, alors la grande majorité vient des propriétés résidentielles. C'est à peu près 46,7 millions de dollars. Il y a aussi les appartements, le terrain vacant. On peut voir pour la propriété non résidentielle, il y a une augmentation, mais c'est beaucoup moins que l'augmentation des propriétés résidentielles. Et c'est parce que, pour les raisons que j'ai déjà dit, mais en termes d'augmentation de valuation, c'était beaucoup plus élevé pour les maisons et pour les appartements que pour les propriétés non résidentielles. But again, overall, we see an increase in the taxes of 2.26%. Again, so some of the local improvement taxes, so small increases from the previous years. And I'll just mention the swimming pool tariff. This is something, to deal with the increased cost for the city to monitor pools. And this is based on provincial government jurisdiction or provincial government regulations in terms of pool safety rules. In terms of other revenue, so pretty standard in terms of the increases. So the biggest one, as mentioned earlier, is the increase for the property transfer. So we went from about 2.6 million to 3 million, so an increase of about 400,000. Most of them are up slightly. I'll just mention two that are down a little bit. So the services rendered by Public Works and Engineering is down slightly, and this is more in line with the actuals. So we had been overestimating the revenue, so this was adjusted by the treasurer in working with the Director of Public Works and Engineering. And the other one was services rendered to the fire department is down slightly, and this is based on a new agreement or new funding formula with the fire department in the central city, based more closely on actuals than estimated amounts. And then the other big one, which we'll get to in more detail on the next slide, is the government grants and transfers, and I'll talk about that next. So in terms of the grants, so the two, I guess I'll focus on two of the bigger ones. I'll focus on Note 1 and Note 3. So for the first one, so this is a new program for recycling. So basically the EEQ, which is a branch of the provincial government, is funding the entire cost of recycling. So you have an increase on the revenue side, but also an increase on the expense side. But it's an offsetting amount, but just it shows here as a large increase. And then the other one is the Pacte Fiscal. So this is the Pacte Fiscal with the provincial government. And I was reviewing this with our Director of Finance and Treasurer. So this is good news. It seems to be good news for all the cities involved. And here too, we know, certainly I would say for the next, mute my phone, my apologies. We know that for the next few years, the numbers are good for the Pacte Fiscal, so we appreciate the additional funding from the provincial government. And I guess just to mention briefly, for Note 2, so this is money that's due to the provincial portion of the tech grant. So it's up because we had more expenses in terms of the tech. So this is money from the gas tax that covers the road repair and pipe repair. It's also linked to the interest rates we pay on the loan. So as the interest rates go up, the amount of money we get from the provincial government is higher because it covers our interest payments on the long-term debt as well. And just, I guess, to mention, the federal government usually pays, I believe it's about 4 or 5 years. And the federal government? Sorry, the federal government pays up front. I thought it was over a few years. The federal government pays up front. The provincial government pays over 20. Yeah, so the federal government pays up front. The provincial government pays over 20 years, but they do pay us the interest or the cost for the interest, so it does balance out. But it's simpler, I would say, on the federal side, but that's a discussion for another day. In terms of, so I'll just keep going. So in terms of local revenue, you have a graph just to show the rough breakdown. So the biggest one you could see in terms of so these are revenue not including taxes. So the biggest one is the government grants. We have the transfer duties as well, and of course fees for recreational and recreational services programs and compensation in lieu of taxes. So those are some of the larger items on the revenue side. En termes de revenu global, alors la majorité vient des taxes. Alors c'est à peu près 84% des revenus viennent des taxes. Il y a aussi une petite portion qui est la compensation en lieu de taxes. Et les autres revenus, c'est à peu près 14,2%. So now we'll switch to expenses. So in terms of expenses, so about 59% cover local expenses and about 41% cover the agglomeration. And it's been, sort of in that 60-40 range for the last few years. In terms of, to keep going on the local expense side, the biggest portion is salaries. And I would say this year went up slightly, partly because of collective agreements that were renegotiated and a new management agreement as well with new different salary scales, which led to increases. And you have some of the other items there, service contracts, material, financing costs, and so on. And I'll just mention financing costs for now is still stable, but again, it'll depend on the interest rates moving forward, which again, we all hope. And, on a personal note, for my credit line and mortgage, I hope that the interest rates go down as well. So in terms of the local expense, and I'll go into these items in more detail in upcoming slides, but you have the larger buckets or larger departments here, showing again a total increase of 4.9%. But again, that includes the extra costs for the recycling, which is offset by a grant on the other side. And yeah, I'll keep going because we'll go through in more detail. Ici, on peut voir un graphe des dépenses locales. Alors, on peut voir le plus grand, c'est les travaux publics. Il y a le loisir et le CAC, l'administration, le service de dette sont les plus grands en termes de dépenses locales par service. So in terms of the city's general administration, so most you'll see slight increases. I mean, I'll just mention one slight decrease. Well, general counsel purchasing, there was one employee who left. It wasn't replaced, so that's a slight reduction. But the other ones, you're seeing slight increases. And is it? Hold on. No, the election. I'm just looking. Yeah, and then the other one, just to mention, which is significant, is the undistributed administration expenses for the election. So the city has budgeted $430,000 for 2025 for the elections, which will take place in November. But you will see later on in terms of appropriations, we had been accruing money, and this is actually a provincial regulation that came into effect a few years ago. So we had been putting some money aside each year over the previous few years. So you'll see an offsetting amount. But I would say that's the most significant increase, is about $400,000 extra for the election, again, to be held in November. To keep going on local expenses, so for public safety, so there's two significant reasons for the increase. One is we have a new service contract for the defibrillators of approximately $91,000. So this is to make sure our defibrillators are always ready and the latest version. So this way, if there is any issue, they're replaced if a new model comes out. So it's basically kind of almost like renting them, I guess, rather than purchasing. But this was recommended by a director of public safety. But the feeling is it'll be safer and better for our residents. God forbid they need it. We want to make sure we have the best in terms of EMS. And we also, I would say, have added an extra staff for public safety. And again, in terms of patrols to keep our city safe and our residents safe, especially in times like today. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So with the new ones. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Sabag. So yeah, the new ones. The goal is again to have I don't know if I would say the best, but I would say that the ones that make the most sense, and so that they're continuously can be updated or replaced if a newer version comes out. Just keep going. So in terms of public works, so we have some increases in a few departments. We actually kind of balanced this out a bit better because what we saw is we weren't necessarily having all the employees in the correct department. So hopefully this is all up to date, but a small increase in public works. En termes des services environnementaux, alors, un bon point, c'est qu'on a fini de payer le service de dette pour l'infrastructure de l'eau. C'était entièrement payé en 2024. Ça a commencé en 2005 quand le diffusion était en place avec la ville de Côte-Saint-Luc. Alors, c'était la 20e année. Alors, c'est un moment pour célébrer un peu qu'on ait fini avec cette dette. Mais il y a encore le taux pour les distributions de l'eau. Il y a aussi le service d'élimination des ordures. Alors, ça inclut le montant qui est éliminé ou pour lequel on a reçu un montant du gouvernement provincial. So overall, we're seeing a slight increase there. But again, part of that is offset by the extra grant from the provincial government. In terms of the recreation culture and the ACC, so again, some increases here in terms of the expense, but most of these, or many of these, I should say, are offset by increase in revenue for programs and services that we are offering for the residents. So for the library as well, a small increase of approximately 4.35%, but again, continuing to offer the best services and continuously to respond to the needs of our residents. So now, in terms of the debt service, so just to share a few highlights here. So the increase in the interest or finance payments again is slightly higher because of the interest rates. We saw, I think it was around 4% that we got on the last, 3.5? Yeah, so 3.5 to 375. So it's it's better, but still a bit higher than we were hoping. And then in terms of the CMM, it seems to be going down, so we're happy about that. Overall, an increase in 4.85, and I'll just mention we have in here a system reserve of 125,000. So this is basically in case of emergency, if something comes up that's unforeseen, we have extra funds that we can use for that purpose. Just one second. Okay. So in terms of various appropriations, so we have the appropriation to the working fund, which is pretty standard. I'll comment on two of them. So as mentioned earlier, we had a cost of about 400,000 for the election. So that's offset in large part of 288,000 from a reserve that had been created the last few years. And I'll just mention on the appropriations needed in the future for pension. So we had put in a reserve of about $50,000 going back to 2008. For those who recall, there was I don't know if I'd say a crash in the stock market, but a significant reduction in the stock market linked to events in the United States and banks closing. So it led us to put an additional amount aside for the last 15 years. So 2024 was the last year of that. So we're done. And that's it for that. And I guess just before I get into the switching more onto the agglomeration and so on, I'll just mention that one thing we've added to the local budget for the first time this year, and it was actually Councillor Kajawski who suggested this at one of our audit meetings, was a grant for reusable diapers and female menstrual products. So this is something starting new in 2025. Residents, and I have to admit we're not the first city to do this, but other cities have as well. So for a resident who spends $100 or more, they're eligible for a grant of $50 or a payment of $50 per year. And it'll run similar to, I would say, the way we do the repayments for people who purchase lead filters for their water. So we'll have more information about this in early 2025. So again, just a summary. Summary of the agglomeration apportionment. So the Côte-Part is the biggest portion, about 32 million. Water services. So one that I do want to mention is the $535,700 for the agglomeration deficit. So this links to the 2023 deficit, which was approximately $45.4 million. So again, in the previous year, we were paying for the 2022 deficit. So I don't want to say it's an annual occurrence, but I would say it's an almost annual occurrence where we're paying for the deficit of previous years of the agglomeration. We hope that there won't be any more agglomeration deficits to pay, but just one to mention. So overall, accounting for an increase of approximately 3.2%. Maintenant, on peut voir un diagramme circulaire sur la répartition des dépenses. Alors, en termes de ce que je disais tout à l'heure, le plus grand, c'est qui est à peu près 41%, c'est pour le Côte-Part. On peut voir les autres domaines, par exemple les travaux publics, l'administration, service de la dette, etc. So now just to go over the tax rates. And again, it's hard to maybe to read all the numbers, but these are all available on the document online and in the room. So you have the tax rates. So you have the residential rates and the apartment rates. So you can see what we've done is as the property valuation increases, we've reduced the tax rate slightly, but again, to equal approximately 2.49% increase. So you have the rates for residential properties, apartment 6+, and for vacant land as well. And then for non-residential properties, this is something we started several years ago to have different categories. So you have the reference subcategory, which is the, for those not including the other ones, you have for shopping malls, office towers, and the railway. So we have different categories, and you have the special water tax and special road reserve. And again, the water tax is used to cover the cost to maintain the water network and for the cost of purchasing water from Montreal. And the road reserve is an extra amount that we've started taxing a few years ago. So this allows us, in case we need to do extra road repairs during a year, to have a small reserve available. And now I will switch to the capital investment 5-year plan, 2025 to 2029, and the priorities for the current year. And again, as mentioned, I'll go into the big headings in a moment, but for 2025, the numbers are pretty fixed, but for the following years, they're still can be adjusted. Alors, on peut voir le plan quinquennal d'investissement pour les prochains 5 ans. Il y a le domaine d'infrastructure, les immeubles et l'amélioration locale, les véhicules, les ameublements et équipements informatiques. On peut voir que pour 2025, c'est à peu près 9 millions de dollars, mais 2026, 27 et 28, c'est entre 11 et 17 millions de dollars. C'est à grande part à cause du travaux sur le passage souterrain de chemin de la côte Saint-Luc. C'est un projet qu'on va faire en partenariat avec la Ville de Montréal, avec l'arrondissement de Côte-des-Neiges Notre-Dame-de-Grâce. On est encore en train de voir si il y a des façons de faire que ça soit un peu moins cher, mais on va vous donner des nouvelles dans les prochains ans. So the biggest, you could see the large amounts for 26 to 27 because of work that is coming on the Côte Saint-Luc underpass, and we're working to find ways to do it lower cost and possibly get some grants as well. And again, here you see some of the totals in terms of the amount potentially to be borrowed, but like I said, we're hoping for 26, 27, 28 to bring that number down. For 2025, you see the number at about 7.4 million, slightly higher. Normally we borrow around $6 million, but just to note that includes about $1.4 million, which was from closed bylaws from previous years. Money that we had planned on spending, we ended up getting extra money in terms of grants from the TEC, which is the gas tax for roads and water repairs and repairs or changing of pipes from lead to copper. So we're still going to be borrowing about $6 million, but it'll be 1.4 that was from previous years, not actually borrowed. So here are the priorities in terms of the investments. So the largest is for roads and sidewalks. The previous several years, we focused more on pipes, and we're trying to do some catch-up on the roads. You have traffic lights, parks, building, vehicles, and office equipment, and I'll go through more detail on each of these in a moment. So for roads, the roads that have been prioritized for 2025 are Fleet westbound from Pinedale to Cavendish, Wolseley from Wavell to Guelph, and we'll be doing about 30 potential lead replacements at the same time. Borden from Fleet to Bailey, Wavell from Parkhaven to Melling, and we plan to do about 78 lead replacements. In terms of sidewalks, the goal is to do approximately 2,300 square meters, and we've done about 7,000 and change meters of sidewalk over the last few years, and we're continuing to work on the traffic lights and street light replacements, switching to LEDs and to put in new conduits for underground wires. So this is something we're continuing to work on. Oh, thank you. And thank you to reminding. So yeah, we've increased, I should mention, we increased the sidewalk repair budget by about $200,000. So I'll just add, this was feedback we received from residents. I can share my parents are getting older, and I know they will mention to me about some of the cracks in the sidewalks. It makes it harder for elderly, and especially this time of the year when it's slippery. So we want to make sure to maintain our sidewalks. So yeah, we're doing about $200,000 extra for sidewalk repairs in 2025. So here you have it. It's not so easy to see, but hopefully it'll be easier for those watching online. So here you have a map of the city showing, it's, I guess, in turquoise, the roads for 2025, and you could see some for the previous years. I mean, what I'll just say in general is we have some catch up to do in terms of road repairs. The plan is to do more this coming year in 2025 and to try to do more over the next few years. But certainly we want to make sure that our roads are in good shape and sidewalks as well. So it's something we'll continue to be working on. And I don't want to get into a political discussion other than to say if the new master plan is successful and more development in the city, it'll allow us to do even more roads moving forward. So in terms of parks and public spaces, so we have purchase of trees, which is financed by the cumulative surplus, and we have an additional budget of $100,000. So again, we want to make sure our city is green and we have a proper canopy. I'll just mention that during the, I guess I would say the years from 2010 to about 2020, we cut down about 2,000 trees, or just over 2,000 trees, due to the emerald ash borer epidemic. So we've caught up, but it's not necessarily the same when you replace a fully grown tree that's 20, 30, 40 years old with a new tree. So we're hoping again to continue. We have renovations on the Gary Carter Field, or T1 at Trudeau Park, renovations to the chalets in terms of bathrooms, and some small parks projects. And we know this is one that is dear to the council, and we've increased the budget for this in 2025. So here are some examples. So you have Bellin Park, Fion, Hellfield Park, where there'll be new play equipment, McDowell and Roback, some water features, Isaac Rabin, completion of the pathways, and some other various small projects in different parks. And I'll just mention, we know that, and I see it, a small piece of equipment in a park sometimes makes more of a difference than hundreds, multi-thousand or hundreds of thousands spent on a road and whatnot in terms of feedback and positive experience from residents. So we want to continue doing that. En termes des immeubles et amélioration locale, il y a la conversion de l'éclairage LED dans la piscine, il y a les travaux sur les tuyaux dans le centre loisirs, aussi le mur de soutènement à l'hôtel de ville près de l'entrée de la bibliothèque, ou l'accès à la bibliothèque, aussi sur la passerelle juste en avant de l'hôtel de ville, et le remplacement du panneau électrique aux travaux publics. Et ça, c'est pour laisser, pour avoir plus de véhicules électriques dans le futur proche. So the last one is replacing the electrical panel for the Public Works yard Right now we have a few electric vehicles. Over the next few years, we'll have several more, and we need to make sure the electric panel is sufficient so that as we purchase these vehicles, we make sure to be able to charge them. And then next one is in terms of vehicles in general. So we have 2 6-wheel dump trucks replacing vehicles from 2004 and 2011, a new Zamboni, which is actually replacing an older vehicle that was decommissioned about 2 years ago. We have 2 ice surfaces. Right now we have 1 Zamboni that has had some issues, so this will be for a second one so that we'll always have one functioning so we can make sure to keep the ice surfaces done properly. Tractor with spreader and public security vehicles, and I'll just mention here the public security vehicles for 2025 will be electric. So we're hoping to some good vehicles, and one eventually we'll have some electric vehicles for VCOPs, but not in 2025. But it's long term. That is part of the plan. So in terms of machinery, snowplow, and some small equipment for tractors and grass cutting. And I think it's almost finished and just actually almost perfectly on time. Some other equipment, security cameras, upgrading to switches and systems, computers, UPS, which is a battery backup, a recreation software, which is going to make registering for programs much easier, new furniture for the library, the lounge, and the ACC water fountain, and installation of a shed for Public Works Yard. And this is one, I remember when I was first elected visiting some of the sheds in the back of Public Works Yard, which were not in the best shape. And I'll just mention these projects, and a few of the other ones I maybe didn't mention all, are funded by the Working Fund. The Working Fund is basically where the city lends money to itself, and then when we lend money to ourselves, we don't actually have to pay interest. Well, that's a good thing. And then we pay back, so we keep using these funds for small projects, generally projects that can be done in a year, and usually smaller items. And with that, we are finished with the presentation. So that is a summary of the 2025 budget. And so again, I thank those who are here in person. I'll take questions in one moment. And just to mention, for those who are online, watching on Zoom, you can send your questions or comments to finance@cotesaintluc.org, or you can email me directly. And I'll stop sharing my screen. And we'll take some questions from the audience. So maybe I'll ask the mayor to...
Who would like to speak? Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. The mayor? The public either. It's all off.
Hi, my name is Malka Labo. I was born at the Jewish General Hospital and moved to Côte Saint-Luc ever since I left there. So I am...
Okay, me too.
Oh, good, okay.
Pretty much.
I'm going to be reading a statement. Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Marino, and council members. I'm going to read this statement, hoping that you'll consider its contents when you ratify the budget concerning an existing contract that you have now. Since the city ended its contract with the SPCA at an annual cost of $15,000, the contract was given to Vaudreuil-Soulanges at an annual cost of close to $8,000. This organization was contacted by a fellow Côte Saint-Luc resident on November 21st concerning a cat issue. The respondent, Mr. Seymour, admitted that they have no facilities for cats. However, for dogs, they do have access to a boarding facility, and if the dog is lost, when the owner comes to pick up the dog, they pay for the boarding fees. Another situation came up this past week. I called Côte Saint-Luc Trap and Neuter. They don't have any resources for this particular issue. I called Vaudreuil-Soulanges concerning 2 cats of an elderly owner who lives in a condo who was hospitalized and will not be coming out. She signed a release to relinquish the cats, and now somebody is taking care of them until we can find out what to do. Called Mr. Seymour, he returned my call. He explained, boarding costs would be the responsibility of the owner. I asked if he could pick up the cats and shelter them until we have a permanent solution. I do have somebody who was there when I made the phone call, but this is what he said pretty much verbatim. I will give you the names of 2 rescues, Casca and Four Paws. He said to then call around some vets and see if they have availability to board the cats. He said, if that fails, call the SPCA. Now, we don't have the SPCA anymore. We relinquished that contract and took Vaudreuil-Soulanges. So why he would even say that is mind-blowing, and he never offered any kind of help or any services for us. So, in truth, we do not know if we are going to have a TNR program anymore. We do our best with the resources we have, but with the vet prices rising and our limited budget, it's being very difficult. We just did have a raffle. We raised close to a little over $5,000, but that's blood, sweat, and tears with a very small, dedicated skeleton volunteer. So I beseech you, and that's a big word, and council to review your contract with Vaudreuil-Soulanges that you're paying over $7,800. That's not offering us anything. And either take that money, find a rescue that is really a rescue, that if we have an issue, we can call them. Like the SPCA, I did call them just to see hypothetically what they would say. They said as long as legally the lady is signing them over, we could send somebody and pick them up. When I said I live in Côte Saint-Luc, she emailed me about 20 rescues that I could call. She says we do not have the mandate anymore. So this is a problem. If you don't want to give this TNR program, I understand that. But do not waste your money on a place that is not serving us at all. That's it.
Councillor Cohen is the person most up to speed on this file, so I'll let him comment first on his feelings.
We had a meeting of the committee last week, and the members of the committee on their own, because as the council responsible, I advocate for them, but on their own, they made these calls. They found out things I wasn't even aware of. I know we moved to Vaudreuil for very valid reasons during trying economic times, but I was not aware to the degree that they are not taking care of cats. So the way I see it is that if we end up not having a CSL cats committee, then what's going to happen? What's going to happen to that dossier? If you had the SPCA, they could probably take care of the cats, not at the level our volunteers do, but they could do it. But Vaudreuil is not taking care of them at all. They've made it very clear to our members who have been calling them on their own. So I don't know what the solution is. Certainly, I think the committee has asked for additional funds in order to carry out the work. Yes, they have a surplus, as Councillor Erdely has told me, from prior years, but it's just like the budget that Councillor Erdely just presented. You have a reserve fund, and that's for reserve. You don't spend all your surplus in one shot. So I think the question that Ms. Labo asked needs to be responded to by the mayor and our finance chair, and the facts speak for themselves. I've spoken to our director of public safety, and he's very happy with the service of Vaudreuil, and he recognizes that we have a volunteer cats committee that does an enormous amount of work. The problem is we met last week, and we don't know how much longer the key members, we have 3 members here, they basically are the only ones who showed up in the entire 30+ thousand citizens of Côte Saint-Luc who came tonight, and so obviously they care, but there's situation where if these people, the small core, leave, there will not be a cats committee anymore. And what happens to, all the feeders who rely on them? I mean, you've built up a certain amount of work, a certain amount of responsibility. And I know some people even around this table are tired of hearing about the cats. because it's a small thing. We have so many things to worry about. Obviously, me being a absolute passionate cat lover, I think differently, but I would certainly like to hear an answer from other members of the table on this issue, because people know where I stand.
Well, let's go for finance first.
So I'll speak in general, and I'll let our treasurer share, maybe if he has more of the financial side. I'll share what I recall, and I'm trying to flip through my emails at the same time, but I wanted to focus on your question. What I recall is we switched from SPCA not for financial reasons. What I recall, we switched there were some service issues. That's my recollection, that we had some issues, and I actually, like I said, I have a lot of emails with SPCA for a few years where there were some issues. I don't want to defame them because I know it's an excellent organization, but from what I recall, there were some conflicts in terms of the services, in terms of expectations, so what we were getting. So, like I said, my recollection is we didn't switch to Vaudreuil-Soulanges for financial reasons. We switched more because there were some issues in terms of the service. Now, I can't speak specifically to cats, but I'm speaking more in general. Now, in terms of the services they're offered, obviously we have to look more into this. I won't have any specific answers, although, like I said, I'll let Director Marino speak in a moment. I'll just mention in terms of on the financial side, the city has been contributing to the CATS committee every year. I'm looking on my screen since I have a kind of a quick synopsis of the CATS committee budget. Going back to at least 2015, I have here, and basically giving, roughly the same amount. There was 1 year we gave more and then went back to the previous budget. But what and Councillor Cohen sort of mentioned this as well, every year the CATS committee has ended the year with a small surplus or small reserve. Not that I'm saying to you spend all your money so you have nothing left, but every year the CATS committee has ended in a reserve. Now, at the same time, what you said is also true. Every year the CATS committee has done a lot of fundraising, and that is what has, I'm looking on the revenue side, some years, well, let's say an average year about $20,000 in terms of fundraising, at least from what I'm seeing here, on different programs. There was the Cats concert, I know, for a few years.
Blitz last year, thanks to Mike Cohn, but other than that, we don't do $20,000 a year anymore.
Okay, so maybe, sorry, I'm looking at the overall revenue, so it could be some grants from M&As and so on, but I'm seeing about $20,000 in revenue every year, plus about $5,000 from the city. Now, what I would say is, I think we have to look more at the issue with Vaudreuil-Soulanges in terms of what services, and obviously we'll get back to you, but I'll let Treasurer Marino say a few words as well. Thank you.
Because is the ask in terms of dollars, or is the ask from what I'm reading here, is the company that you want us to switch from using, or is it a financial one in terms of the money that you need? Because from this statement, you don't talk in terms, there's no ask for a specific dollar amount increase in this ask. It's only about the company not doing their job for the money that we're spending.
Company, you're paying the company, you're paying Soulanges Vaudreuil $7,800, but we are not getting anything from it. There are no resources. They don't have kennels. They don't have boarding. Since the inception, since we have been using them, there has only been one time that they have found a dog of a Côte Saint-Luc resident. And the dog was brought to a boarding facility, and she paid to get the dog back. That's it.
But is the ask to go back to the SPCA?
Pardon me?
What's the request? To go back to the SPCA?
My request is not to renew their contract, because in Jewish we say a rois gewarfen a geld. You're throwing the money out and you're not getting anything back. I'm not here to say, give me $5,000 or give me what you were giving to Vaudreuil. I'm saying that we need a backup, and we need a responsible backup that will be able to help us when we're in need. Diane has cages in her garage. That's one of the backups, but we need the city to investigate and find somebody reliable with resources. They don't have it, and the fact that they're taking your money and not offering anything in return, with today's inflation and everything that's going on, it's not money well spent. It's
Okay, well,
money
I'll
thrown
ask
out.
if you have anything to add.
No, I don't have
No,
pretty much.
really, because I'm not a specialist in the SPCA or in this company, so I don't know the answer, and I don't know if you, Councillor Cohn, do or what research is needed. But if there's a backup and we shouldn't be using the SPCA because they didn't do a good job, and we shouldn't be using this company because they're not doing a good job, we need to know what we should be doing. I got my first cat when I was 7 years old, so I certainly enjoyed having a cat. But I'm just not sure what the ask is here. Is it no SPCA, no Solange
I'm fine with
Vaudreuil?
SPCA. They have the resources for us.
Or you think SPCA would be good here?
100%, because they have, and they don't euthanize. They try to find fosters.
Well, that's where I got my cat, by the way. SPCA.
That's where I got my
I
cat.
think the ask is, I do recognize that in speaking to Director Chateauvert, and this is a budget, it's public, we're paying about $7,000 for this service, between 7 and 8, and SPCA was going to bring their cost up to about 30,000, and the feeling was that they were not delivering everything we needed them to. However, if a Côte Saint-Luc resident shows up at the SPCA, they'll be serviced because we have a contract. Right now, they won't. And it's much easier for someone to show up at the corner of Jean Talon and to carry than to drive out to Vaudreuil to be told we don't take care of cats. So we do have a problem if the Cats Committee shuts its doors, and after over 10 years of the work that's being done, and everyone knows the work that's being done, people will notice. They will notice that a cat committee not existing. So again, I just think it needs to be discussed. I know Director Chateauvert told me his response was that the contract with Vaudreuil is month to month. It's not a yearly contract, so that this can be evaluated in 2025. I do know that I'll go on the record as saying the Cats Committee has asked for an increase in their allotment for the year. And, that's still on the record. I know right now they're getting what they got before. So the expenses are excessive because we still have a core group of committee who are doing things that are almost inhuman. The amount of hours they're putting in, the calls they're getting. People know now. They know over the years that they can call, they can go onto the Facebook page, they could source our volunteers, they can get someone to show up at their house. None of these people are paid employees. Diane Liebling was named our overall volunteer of the year this year, so that's the kind of recognition. So I think, if I can read Ms. Labo's mind, I think they're asking for A, to reevaluate the service we're getting for animal protection, and B, from the committee last week when we met, I was asked to at least convey at this meeting, because it is a budget meeting, to see if the increase the increase they asked for could be given. And I'm just passing the message on, okay?
Right, so basically what I would ask is that you should be a liaison from the committee to council to prepare an R for council as to what you would recommend that we do. I don't think we're going to be able to make a decision at the budget meeting, but you can present an ARF maybe next week or in the next couple of weeks as to what you suggest we would do based on their needs and what the available funds are based on financing, fundraising, grants, and money from the city of Côte Saint-Luc. Because we certainly would want the Cats Committee to continue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Are there any other questions here or online? Any online? No? No? Anybody else? No? Okay.
So just,
Can I ask a question, though,
Sure
a
can.
non-cat question, please?
Absolutely.
Can you tell me, Councillor Erdely, what is the exact total we got, or Mr. Marino, from the welcome tax overall? Did you say it was $3 million?
sorry, to clarify, 3 million is what we budgeted for next year.
For next year, okay, so I meant to ask, so how much in the end did we get this year from, because we had the buildings, the 5 buildings
So
sold
this
twice.
year,
Sure was a good
we're
one.
at 6.
It was a good year.
So we're forecasting about 8.5, but I think we're at 6-7 now. But we're still.
So I just wanted to be on the record on YouTube, that we had a lot of concern, a very valid concern by people living on Kildare and Sir Walter Scott when the buildings were first purchased. and the pressure that we as a council, and I want to thank Councillor Burku for, being a tenants' rights expert. I want to thank our urban planning department for working with me, and we put in a lot of pressure on the owners, make it very clear to them that rent eviction was not going to happen, and we ended up having those buildings, which was unprecedented almost, to be sold twice. How much money did we get in total just from that development, those two buildings in total from welcome tax? Okay, so $3.2 million. That's why that's not going to happen. May never happen again. But we got $3.2 million for those 5 buildings sold twice.
So maybe I'll just add, I guess, good and bad. If we look at 2019, 2020, 21, 22, we were in the range of $4 to $8 million for the transfer duties. 2023, we had budgeted $4 million, and we ended up finishing about 2.7, 2.8. So we were about 1.2 million short. And we almost, I mentioned earlier, there was basically 1 year where we almost hit a deficit, and that was 2023. And anyway, luckily, thanks to some other measures and sort of appropriations, we were able to just kind of eke out a balanced budget. So what we learned, and this is something that I guess we have to live by, is we never know what happens year to year. So we know, the tax rate, we know what we're going to get, plus or minus. I think we have about 40,000 for contestations. So plus or minus 40,000, we know what we're going to get. In terms of the welcome tax, we could be off by $500,000, $1 million, or several $1 million. So that year, 2023, we were about 1.2, 1.3 million short. So for 2024, Councillor Cohn is correct. Basically, we're actually here. I'm looking at the latest. So we're about 7.5, 7.6, and we're predicting, 8.25?
Well,
huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're predicting just over 8 million for 2024.
I could buy a lot of cat food, by the way.
Now that money, I should mention, that money will go towards fixing roads. That money will go towards repairing pipes. That money will go toward parks. Hopefully, so we can borrow a bit less money moving forward. So that money will be well spent. So for next year, we're budgeting $3 million because, as mentioned, I don't know if I'd say 2 properties, but 2 kind of banks of properties that were sold twice.
Yeah.
Generated over $3 million.
It's an anomaly.
Which is an anomaly and won't happen every year. Now, if we end up with a surplus again, I think it's hopefully good. And like I said, we'll use that money to do more capital works, to borrow less money moving forward. But I guess my hope or my preference is to balance a bit more conservatively, rather than budgeting for 4 or 5 million, and then we end up short, and then we end up in a deficit, and then we're scrambling, cutting in the middle of the year and having to cut services, which we don't want to do. So, like I said, I think one of the points when I started was we can't predict the future. We can't predict home sales or interest rates or the stock market. Those are things beyond, but definitely, I guess just to backtrack and summarize. So. First, I thank Ms. Lebo for the question. Definitely, we're going to do our homework and do more research and figure out what information we need. But I also want to take a moment to thank my fellow councillors, thank the mayor, again, thank our treasurer, Angela Marino. Really, you and your team for all the hard work behind the scenes to really keep us focused on task and make sure we're doing the best for the residents. And
can I ask a second budget question, please? I know that we've talked about it, Mr. Marino. In terms of vacant land, what is the plan in terms of increasing? Because people who have vacant land are totally taking advantage of the situation in Côte Saint-Luc. Two pieces of vacant land in my district where they don't keep the land up at all. They don't do anything with it. They don't plan to do anything with it. They don't cut the grass. And so what are we able to do in terms of increasing the taxation for them so that maybe there's an incentive for them to build instead of just keep that land, a pigsty?
So up until recently, we were allowed to go up to 2 times the residential rate. The law was adjusted in 2021 late 2023 for 2024, and this council chose to increase it slightly over a period of time. So for next year, it's going to be 2.25, and then we'll see in the future where we go. But
How
we
much
can
is
go
that up
to-
from last year? 2.25, it used to be what?
It used to be 2.
Okay.
Okay, and then the maximum we can go
And the maximum is what?
is 4 times.
4 times. Wow. Well,
So-
just keep on going up.
Yeah, well, let's keep going up because it's, you know, it's a good message.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Angela Marino, our treasurer, for the excellent work that you do. We're really blessed to have you. Thank you so much. She works really hard. Always be on the call of duty there for us, and to be 2 weeks ahead of everybody else, I think that's a first, and we're very proud of it. And it's a great budget. It is a really good budget. We're proud of this budget, and may we continue to have sustainable budgets in the future. Thank you.